Twitter says it will bring back election labels to help users identify accounts and tweets from U.S. political candidates. The company says labels will show up on the accounts of candidates running for Congress or governor next year and who have qualified for the general election ballot. They're not the only 2020 candidates on Twitter, though. CNET senior producer Dan Patterson looked into how the Democratic presidential candidates stack up on the site. Dan, thanks so much for being with us. So you looked at the Twitter data of the candidates who qualified for this week's debate. Before we get started, how does looking at this platform actually give us a better understanding of the 2020 race?
That is a fantastic question, Elaine. Look, Twitter is not the biggest social network in the world, but they are one of the most influential, particularly when we look at the president of the United States. It is his social network of choice, and whether we love it or lump it, he makes news with that Twitter account. But he's not the only one. We look at lawmakers and we look at those who are running for president, and they too make news when they use Twitter. There are also undercurrents of what we call inauthentic activity on Twitter. So this can be bots, it can be trolls, but it can be an attempt to influence not just our elections, but how we perceive politics going into an election. So it might not be the biggest, but Twitter is absolutely one of the most influential social networks in 2020.
So ahead of Thursday's debate, who appears to be excelling on Twitter?
So we looked at, I used a tool called Sosomos, which pulls directly from the Twitter API. We tried to look at Twitter data specifically or directly, and we saw some really fascinating trends. The number one trend that we saw was that the velocity belongs to Bernie Sanders. He's adding about 100,000 followers per week. 2 weeks ago, 98,000 followers. Last week, 101,000 followers.
Per week.
And Bernie Sanders is, again, we don't want to make this a horse race, but Bernie Sanders is clearly in the lead in terms of total number of Twitter followers.
So do voters follow many candidates or only their candidate of choice?
Fascinating to see this, Elaine. Less than 1% of followers cross over with each other, which shows the degree to which we are all kind of in our own filter bubble, right? So it might be the rare person who follows all the candidates, but what we definitely saw is that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders share the most followers.
Interesting, yeah, but for the most part, it sounds like people are staying in their silos.
Yeah.
They've identified them and they're staying there. What were some of your takeaways from the makeup of these candidates' followers?
Well, it was fascinating to pull the data. I keep saying fascinating, but every time we looked at the data, it was fascinating.
Yeah, sure.
So if you look at the bio, you know, when you join Twitter or a social network, you fill out your biographical information, right? So the number one most used word of the followers of presidential candidates was love. I know that all kind of sounds schmaltzy.
All right, Dan Patterson.
This is the word
love
that followers
was in their bio.
Most frequently add to their bio.
Okay, all right. I don't know what we make of that, but that is an interesting point to note. What can we learn about politics by examining social media? Because I feel like this is something we are not even at the cusp of beginning to understand, really.
Yeah, so to give you an example, in 2015 and 2016, we did a very similar process. Just pull the Twitter data on the candidates. In that case, it was Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And before major events like debates, we saw spikes in Twitter followers. Now, that can be the candidate going out or the campaign going out and doing activities that might add followers, a rally, an event, that kind of thing. But in the case of Donald Trump, we saw accounts that were later banned or had, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 followers, almost no profile picture. And then stories started to come out about bots and what we call, again, inauthentic activity, because these are often, the jargon is sock puppet. It is an account that is created by somebody that is not your name, but is kind of anonymous and allows you to act in the social sphere in a particular way that you might not act if your name is attached to it.
Interesting. All right. Well, what surprised you most when you did this deep dive into the Twitter data?
Well, I think that certainly seeing love pop up in the followers was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
What was most interesting was that Joe Biden remained in the lead, at least when we look at all of the engagement metrics.
Because what's that made up of?
Right, so that is likes, shares, retweets, and comments on an account, so as well as additions, so following somebody. So when we add all of those things together, we still see that Joe Biden remains a front runner.
All right, really important to sort of understand the social media landscape ahead of the election. Dan Patterson, Dan, thank you so much.
Good to see you.